Every parent's worst nightmare became Sheriff Tom Harlan's reality when he found 7-year-old Emma floating face down in Willow Creek. For a moment, his 64-year-old heart stopped beating as he pulled her small, lifeless body from the cold water. Tom thought it was a drowning until he saw her belly. The bruises were too dark, too fresh, arranged in a pattern that made his blood run cold. Someone had hurt this child before she ended up in the creek. The townspeople gathered around, asking questions Tom couldn't answer. He'd been sheriff for 30 years, thought he knew everyone in their quiet ranching community. But as he looked at Emma's injuries, memories surfaced of another missing child from decades ago, a case that still haunted his dreams. What if the person who did this was standing right there among the concerned neighbors? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ambulance sirens faded into the distance as Tom Harlan followed the emergency vehicle toward County General Hospital, his hands still trembling on the steering wheel. Emma's small pink hair ribbon lay on the passenger seat where it had fallen. When he lifted her from the creek, a fragile reminder of how quickly a child's world could shatter. At 64, Tom had seen enough tragedy in his 3 decades as sheriff to understand that some cases changed you forever. The weight of Emma's unconscious body in his arms, the way her wet hair had clung to his uniform, the absolute stillness of her chest before the paramedics took over. These details would stay with him, regardless of how the investigation unfolded. The hospital's emergency department buzzed with controlled urgency. Tom paced the waiting area, his boots clicking against the polished floor, while doctors worked behind closed doors. He'd called his deputy, Maria Santos, to secure the creek. Scene. But his mind kept drifting to a weathered cardboard box sitting in his office filing cabinet. Inside that box were 30 years' worth of unsolved cases, but one file remained thicker than all the others. Lucy Martinez, age 6, missing since September 1994. Sheriff Harlan, a woman in scrubs, approached, her voice professional but kind. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, pediatrics. Emma is stable now." Dr. Chen was perhaps 40, with the measured demeanor of someone who had delivered both good news and heartbreak to countless families. She gestured toward a small consultation room where they could speak privately. "She's conscious but largely unresponsive," Dr. Chen explained as they sat down. "No water in her lungs, which confirms she wasn't drowning. The hypothermia was mild. She wasn't in the water very long." Tom nodded, though his focus remained on the question that had been gnawing at him since pulling Emma from the creek. "What about the bruising?" Dr. Chen's expression grew somber. "The marks on her abdomen are consistent with adult finger impressions. Recent, probably within the last 24 hours. I've documented everything for your investigation, but Sheriff, this child has been hurt." The confirmation hit Tom like a physical blow. In his gut, he'd known the truth from the moment he saw those dark marks, but hearing it spoken aloud made the reality unavoidable. Someone in his community, someone he might know, might have shared coffee with at the diner or nodded to at church, had deliberately harmed a 7-year-old child. "Has she said anything?" Tom asked. "Very little. She asked for water and said thank you when I gave it to her. She seems more frightened than confused, which suggests she remembers what happened." Tom made notes in the small notebook he'd carried. For 15 years, the leather cover worn smooth by countless investigations. "What about her foster family, the Hendricks?" "They're in the family waiting area, genuinely distraught from what I can observe. They've been very cooperative with the medical team. The Hendricks family had taken Emma in 6 months ago through the county's foster care system. Tom knew them peripherally. Dale worked at the feed store, and his wife Jennifer taught Sunday school at the Methodist church. They were the kind of people who seemed naturally drawn to helping others, which made them both ideal foster parents, and potentially perfect cover for someone with darker intentions. Tom's radio crackled with Maria's voice. "Sheriff, you need to see what we found at the creek." "On my way," Tom replied, then turned to Dr. Chen. I'd like to post a deputy here, just as a precaution. Emma's the only witness we have. Dr. Chen nodded. I'll make sure the staff knows to be extra careful about who has access to her room. The drive back to Willow Creek gave Tom time to think about the parallels between Emma's case and Lucy Martinez's disappearance 30 years earlier. Lucy had vanished from a church picnic, her body never found despite weeks of searching. The case had consumed Tom during his early years as sheriff, representing his first major failure in a career that would span 3 decades. Lucy's file contained witness statements, search reports, and dozens of photographs. But what haunted Tom most were the drawings she'd made in the weeks before her disappearance. Her teacher had saved them, crayon sketches of houses and people that Lucy's mother said didn't match anywhere they'd lived or anyone they knew. One drawing showed a house with a distinctive red door, and Lucy had written "nice man's house" in her careful 7-year-old handwriting. Maria Santos stood beside her patrol car when Tom arrived at the creek. At 35, she'd been his deputy for 8 years and possessed the kind of methodical approach to investigation that Tom valued highly. She'd secured the scene with yellow tape and was photographing the area where Emma had been found. "What do you have?" Tom asked. "Emma's shoes," Maria said, pointing upstream about a quarter-mile from where Tom had pulled the child from the water. "Found them caught on some branches, like they fell off while someone was carrying her." Tom studied the location. The creek meandered through ranch land for several miles before reaching the spot where he'd found Emma. If someone had carried her from the shoes location, they would have walked through relatively isolated terrain, suggesting familiarity with the area and confidence they wouldn't be observed. "Any tire tracks? Footprints?" "Nothing clear enough to cast. The bank's too rocky here, and we had that rain 2 days ago." Maria paused, studying her notes. "Sheriff, there's something else. I called the Hendricks to verify Emma's whereabouts yesterday, and they said she was supposed to be at a supervised visit with her biological mother." This was new information. Tom had assumed Emma lived full-time with the Hendricks family, but supervised visits suggested ongoing complications with her case. Where was this visit supposed to take place? County Social Services building. I called them, and they said Emma never showed up. Nobody reported her missing because there was confusion about who was supposed to transport her. Tom felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. Bureaucratic confusion in the foster care system created dangerous gaps where children could disappear for hours or even days before anyone realized something was wrong. Lucy Martinez had fallen through a similar crack, officially in the custody of her grandmother for the weekend, but her grandmother had assumed Lucy was staying with friends from church. "I want to interview everyone who had contact with Emma in the past week," Tom said. "Foster family, social workers, biological parents if they're available, and Maria, pull the records for every child who's gone missing in this county over the past 30 years. Maria raised an eyebrow. "That's a lot of files, Sheriff." "Start with the unsolved cases," Tom said, thinking of the cardboard box in his office. "I have a feeling we're going to find some patterns." The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the cottonwood trees that lined the creek as Tom made his way back to the hospital. Emma would need time to recover physically, but more importantly, she would need careful handling to preserve whatever memories she carried of her ordeal. Tom had worked with traumatized children before and understood that pushing too hard, too fast, could cause them to retreat entirely. Dr. Chen met him in the hallway outside Emma's room. "She's been drawing," she said quietly. The nurses gave her some paper and crayons to keep her occupied. Through the small window in Emma's door, Tom could see her sitting up in bed, her dark hair now clean and brushed, wearing a hospital gown decorated with cartoon animals. She was bent over a piece of paper, working intently with a red crayon. "Has she shown the drawing to anyone?" Tom asked. "Not yet. She seems very focused on getting it right." Tom thought about Lucy Martinez's drawings, filed away in that cardboard box for 30 years. Children often communicated through pictures what they couldn't express in words, especially When those words described experiences too frightening for their young minds to process fully. "I'd like to speak with her when she's ready," Tom said. "But I don't want to push. She's been through enough." Dr. Chen nodded. "I'll let you know when. She seems more receptive to visitors. In the meantime, I've scheduled a consultation with our child psychologist for tomorrow morning." As Tom prepared to leave the hospital, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Judge Patricia Williams, who oversaw the county's foster care system. Judge Williams was 72, had served on the bench for nearly 4 decades, and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of every child who had passed through the system during her tenure. "Tom, I heard about the little girl," Judge Williams said without preamble. "How is she?" "Stable, traumatized, but she'll recover physically." "Good. I've been reviewing Emma's file, and I want you to know we're dealing with a particularly complicated case here. This child has been through 3 foster homes in 2 years." Tom felt his pulse quicken. Multiple placements often indicated either a difficult child or systemic problems within the foster care system itself. What kind of complications? Behavioral issues mostly? Night terrors, difficulty bonding with caregivers, some aggressive tendencies. The kind of symptoms we typically see in children who've experienced severe trauma. Was there ever any indication of abuse in her previous placements? Judge Williams paused. "Nothing documented, but Tom, you know how these things work. Sometimes problems develop gradually, and sometimes children are too frightened or confused to report what's happening to them." After ending the call, Tom sat in his patrol car for several minutes, watching hospital staff move efficiently through the parking lot as the day shift ended and the evening crew arrived. Emma's case was becoming more complex by the hour, but complexity often revealed truth if you knew how to follow the patterns. The drive back to the sheriff's department took him through the heart of town, past the courthouse where Judge Williams presided, past the diner where he ate breakfast most mornings, past the Methodist church where the Hendricks family worshipped. This was a community where people knew their neighbors' children, where front doors remained unlocked, where the most serious crimes typically involved cattle theft or domestic disputes that could be resolved with careful conversation and common sense. But Tom understood that small-town familiarity could also provide perfect cover for predators who learned to blend seamlessly into the community fabric. The person who had hurt Emma might be someone he'd known for years, someone whose public persona concealed darker private behaviors. Back at his office, Tom pulled the cardboard box from his filing cabinet and spread Lucy Martinez's case files. Across his desk, the photographs showed a bright-eyed 6-year-old with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, wearing a yellow sundress at the church picnic where she was last seen alive. The witness statements painted a picture of confusion and missed opportunities. Lucy had been seen talking to several adults at the picnic, but in the chaos of children running and playing, no one had paid close attention to her movements. By the time her grandmother noticed she was missing, precious hours had already passed. Tom studied Lucy's drawings once again, particularly the house with the red door. The proportions were childish, but the details were specific. A large front porch, shuttered windows, what appeared to be a stone walkway leading to the door. Someone had provided Lucy with these visual references, someone she trusted enough to visit their home. As he worked late into the evening, Tom began to see connections that had eluded him 30 years earlier. Both Lucy and Emma were children in vulnerable situations, Lucy temporarily staying with her grandmother while her parents dealt with marital problems, Emma moving between foster homes without stable adult relationships. Both girls were at ages where they would naturally trust friendly adults, especially those in positions of authority or respect within the community. The phone rang at nearly 10 o'clock. Dr. Chen's voice carried news that made Tom's heart race. "Sheriff, you need to get back here. Emma just showed me her drawing, and I think you're going to want to see it immediately." Tom was already reaching for his jacket. "What did she draw?" "A house," Dr. Chen said quietly. "A house with a red door." Tom arrived at the hospital within minutes, his mind racing with the implications of Emma's drawing. Dr. Chen met him at the nurse's station, holding a piece of white paper covered in bright crayon marks. "She finished it about an hour ago, Doctor," Chen said, handing him the drawing. "When I asked her about it, she just said, 'That's where the games happen.'" Tom studied the paper under the fluorescent lights. Emma's artistic skills were more advanced than Lucy's had been, but the subject matter was unmistakably similar. The house featured a prominent red door, a wide front porch, and distinctive stone steps. Most unsettling were the stick figures Emma had drawn, a large adult figure and a much smaller child figure standing near the door. "Has she said anything else?" Tom asked. "She asked if the nice man was coming to visit her. When I asked who she meant, she said, 'Judge Grandpa.' Then she became very quiet and wouldn't elaborate." Tom's blood chilled. In their small community, there was only one person children might refer to as Judge Grandpa, retired Judge Harold Winters, who had served on the bench for over 40 years before stepping down 5 years ago. Judge Winters was 78, widely respected, and had been involved in foster care placements throughout his career. "Dr. Chen, I need you to keep this drawing safe. And please, don't mention what Emma said about Judge Grandpa to anyone, else until we can investigate further." Dr. Chen nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "She's been asking for her hospital bracelet, the one with her name on it. She wants to keep it after she leaves." Tom looked through the window at Emma, who was now sleeping peacefully. The small plastic bracelet on her wrist represented her identity in this moment of crisis, something concrete to hold on to when everything else felt uncertain. The next morning brought a series of interviews that painted an increasingly troubling picture of Emma's recent history. Tom started with Dale and Jennifer Hendricks, meeting them at their modest ranch-style home on the outskirts of town. Jennifer Hendricks was a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who had clearly been crying. Her husband Dale, a sturdy man with weathered hands from years of physical work, sat beside her on their living room couch. "Emma's been with us for 6 months, Jennifer explained. She was having problems in her previous placement, and Judge Williams asked if we could take her temporarily while they worked on a more permanent solution." "What kind of problems?" Tom asked. Dale shifted uncomfortably. "Night terrors, mostly. She'd wake up screaming about games and hiding places. The social worker said it was normal for children from troubled backgrounds." Tom made careful notes. "Did Emma ever mention specific people who frightened her?" "She talked about wanting to see Judge Grandpa," Jennifer said. "We assumed she meant Judge Winters. He visits the foster children sometimes, just to check on how they're doing. Emma seemed to light up when she mentioned him." This information directly contradicted Emma's fearful behavior at the hospital. Tom wondered if Emma's positive association with Judge Winters was genuine affection or something more complicated. The kind of conflicted feelings children often develop toward adults who provided both rewards and trauma. "When did you last see Emma?" Tom asked. 2 days ago, Dale replied. "She was supposed to go to a supervised visit with her biological mother, Rebecca. The social worker was supposed to pick her up at 9 in the morning, but no one showed up. We called the office, and they said there had been a scheduling mix-up." Tom's next stop was the county social services building, a utilitarian structure that housed the bureaucracy responsible for the welfare of vulnerable children. The caseworker assigned to Emma was a tired-looking woman named Patricia Moss, who had been handling foster placements for 12 years. "Emma's case has been challenging from the beginning," Patricia explained, pulling a thick file from her cabinet. "Her biological mother, Rebecca, has been in and out of rehabilitation programs. For drug addiction, the father is unknown. Emma has displayed classic symptoms of early childhood trauma, but we've never been able to identify the specific source." Tom reviewed Emma's placement history. Her first foster home had been with an elderly couple, the Johnsons, who had returned her to the system after 3 months, citing behavioral problems. The second placement with the Reed family had lasted only 6 weeks before they requested Emma's removal. "What kind of behavioral problems?" Tom asked. Patricia consulted her notes. The Johnsons reported that Emma was afraid of basements and older men. She would become hysterical if they tried to take her downstairs for any reason. The Reeds said she drew disturbing pictures and talked about secret games that adults played with children. Tom felt pieces of a terrible puzzle beginning to align. Did anyone investigate these reports? We documented everything, but without specific allegations or physical evidence, there wasn't much we could do beyond finding new placements. Judge Winters personally reviewed Emma's case and recommended the Hendricks family as potentially stabilizing for her. The mention of Judge Winters' direct involvement sent alarm bells ringing in Tom's mind. While it wasn't unusual for a family court judge to take personal interest in difficult cases, the pattern was becoming uncomfortable, especially given Emma's reference to Judge Grandpa. Tom's afternoon was spent tracking down Rebecca Martinez, Emma's biological mother, at a rehabilitation facility 60 miles away. The Valley Recovery Center was a clean, well-maintained building surrounded by desert landscape, designed to provide both treatment and isolation from the triggers that led to addiction. Rebecca was 28, but looked older, her face bearing the premature lines that came from years of substance abuse. She agreed to meet with Tom in a small conference room, accompanied by her counselor. "I haven't seen Emma in 3 months," Rebecca said, her voice hollow with guilt and grief. "I was supposed to have supervised visits, but I relapsed and missed several appointments. They suspended my visitation rights until I completed this program." Tom studied Rebecca's file, which documented a pattern of drug-related arrests, failed rehabilitation attempts, and children's services interventions that dated back to Emma's infancy. "Rebecca, did Emma ever mention specific people she was afraid of? Anyone who might have hurt her?" Rebecca's hands trembled as she considered the question. She used to talk about a nice man who gave her candy and toys. She called him Grandpa, but that didn't make sense because both her actual grandfathers died before she was born. Tom's pulse quickened. Did she ever describe this person? Old, with white hair. She said he had a big house with lots of rooms where children could play special games. Rebecca's voice broke. "I was so messed up back then, Sheriff. I thought she was just being imaginative. I should have paid more attention." As Tom drove back toward town, he wrestled with the implications of what he'd learned. Every interview pointed toward the same troubling conclusion. Emma had been systematically abused by someone in a position of trust and authority, someone with access to vulnerable children through the foster care system. His radio crackled with Maria's voice. "Sheriff, I found something you need to see. I've been going through those old missing persons files, and there are patterns you're not going to like." Tom met Maria at the sheriff's department as the sun was setting behind the mountains. She had spread dozens of case files across the conference table, each representing a child who had disappeared from their county over the past 3 decades. "Look at the placement histories," Maria said, pointing to highlighted sections in various files. 11 missing children over 30 years, all of them in foster care or temporary custody arrangements. And Sheriff, Judge Winters was involved in the placement decisions for every single one of them. Tom studied the files with growing horror. The pattern was unmistakable. Children removed from troubled homes, placed in temporary care, then vanishing before permanent placements could be arranged. Some had been found dead, others never located, but all had been vulnerable and isolated at the time of their disappearance. "There's more," Maria continued. "I cross-referenced the foster families involved, and several received significant financial donations from a charitable foundation. Guess who sits on the board of that foundation?" Tom didn't need to guess. Judge Winters. As they worked late into the evening, mapping connections and timelines, Tom realized they were looking at something far more systematic than he had initially imagined. This wasn't a case of opportunistic abuse. It was a carefully constructed network that had operated for decades, protected by institutional authority and community respect. The phone rang at midnight. Dr. Chen's voice was urgent. "Sheriff, Emma woke up screaming about an hour ago. She's been asking for you specifically. She says she remembers something important about the man who hurt her, but she'll only tell you." Tom grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Emma's memories might provide the key to unlocking 30 years of concealed crimes, but they would also force her to relive trauma that no child should ever experience. As he drove through the quiet streets of his town, Tom understood that his investigation had reached a point of no return. The evidence was leading toward conclusions that would shatter his community's faith in its institutions and its leaders. But Emma deserved justice, just as Lucy Martinez had deserved justice 30 years ago. The small hospital bracelet she treasured represented more than just her identity. It represented her survival and her courage. Tom was determined to ensure that this time, unlike 30 years ago, survival would be followed by truth. Tom found Emma sitting up in her hospital bed, clutching a small stuffed bear that one of the nurses had brought her. In the soft glow of the bedside lamp, she looked impossibly young and fragile, but her eyes held a determination that reminded Tom of the strength children could summon when they finally felt safe enough to speak truth. "Hi, Sheriff Tom," Emma said quietly. "Dr. Chen said you wanted to help me." Tom pulled a chair close to her bed, speaking in the gentle tone he'd learned to use with frightened children over 3 decades of law enforcement. "That's right, Emma. I want to make sure no one can hurt you anymore." Emma considered this for a moment, then reached under her pillow and pulled out the drawing she'd made earlier. "This is the house where the games happen. The man with white hair lives there." Tom studied the drawing again, noting details he'd missed before. Emma had drawn what appeared to be a basement window at ground level, and small figures that might represent other children. "Emma, can you tell me about the man with white hair?" "He's nice at first," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He gives you candy and says you're special. He has pictures of lots of children on his walls, and he says they all loved playing his games." Tom's heart broke for this child, who was trying so hard to make sense of experiences no 7-year-old should endure. "What kind of games did he want you to play?" Emma's grip tightened on her stuffed bear. "Secret games. He said they were our special secret, and if I told anyone, bad things would happen to the other children in the pictures." This revelation confirmed Tom's worst fears about Judge Winters. The photographs Emma mentioned suggested he had been documenting his crimes, possibly for decades. The threat to other children was a classic manipulation tactic used by predators to ensure their victims' silence. "Emma, you're very brave for telling me this. Did you ever see any of the other children from the pictures?" Emma nodded slowly. "Sometimes. There was a girl with pigtails who looked sad. The man said she had to go away because she didn't want to play games anymore." Tom's blood ran cold. Emma's description matched Lucy Martinez perfectly. The connection between the cases was no longer theoretical. Emma had actually seen evidence of Lucy in Judge Winters' house. The next morning, Tom began the delicate process of investigating a pillar of their community. He started by visiting the Johnson family, Emma's first foster placement at their small farm outside town. Robert and Helen Johnson were both in their 70s, well-meaning people who had taken in foster children for over 20 years. Emma was troubled when she came to us, Helen explained, as they sat in her neat kitchen. She had nightmares almost every night, crying about hiding places and secret rooms. We thought it was just adjustment anxiety. Robert Johnson nodded gravely. She was terrified of our basement, wouldn't even go near the door, and she had strange reactions to certain visitors, became very agitated whenever older men came to the house. "Did she ever draw pictures while she was with you?" Tom asked. Helen disappeared into another room and returned with a manila folder. "We saved some of her artwork. The social worker said it might be helpful for her therapist to see." Tom opened the folder and found several disturbing drawings. One showed a house with a red door, almost identical to the picture Emma had drawn at the hospital. Another depicted what appeared to be a basement room, with small figures huddled in corners. Most unsettling was a drawing of an older man standing over a child with the word games written in Emma's careful printing. "Did you show these to anyone at the time?" Tom asked. "We gave copies to the social worker," Robert said. "She said they were concerning but not specific enough to warrant investigation. She suggested Emma might benefit from more specialized care." Tom's next stop was the Reed family, Emma's second placement. Karen Reed was a single mother in her 40s who worked as a nurse at the county hospital. She had taken Emma in with hopes of eventually adopting her, but the arrangement had lasted only 6 weeks. Emma was having severe behavioral problems, Karen explained. "She would have panic attacks if I tried to take her certain places, especially anywhere near the courthouse or downtown area. She seemed terrified of seeing someone she knew." Did she ever mention specific people she was afraid of? She talked about wanting to visit Judge Grandpa, but then she'd become upset and say she didn't want to play games anymore. I assumed she was confused about something, maybe mixing up memories from different placements. Karen showed Tom more of Emma's drawings from that period. The progression was disturbing. Earlier pictures showed the house with the red door, but later drawings depicted the same house with dark windows and small figures trying to escape. "I found her one morning trying to pack her clothes," Karen said. "She said Judge Grandpa was going to be angry if she didn't come visit him soon. That's when I realized she might have been hurt by someone in a position of authority." Tom's investigation was building a comprehensive picture of systematic abuse, but he needed physical evidence to support Emma's testimony. That afternoon, he drove through the older residential neighborhood where Judge Winters lived, studying the houses and their architectural features. Judge Winters' home was a substantial Victorian structure built in the 1920s, featuring the distinctive red door and stone walkway that both Emma and Lucy had drawn. The house sat on a large lot, surrounded by mature trees that provided privacy from neighboring properties. Tom parked across the street and observed the property carefully. The basement windows Emma had drawn were visible at ground level, and the overall layout matched her artistic descriptions remarkably well. This was clearly the location both children had visited, willingly at first, then with growing fear and resistance. Back at the sheriff's department, Tom retrieved the cardboard box containing Lucy Martinez's case files. He spread the contents across his desk again, this time looking for connections he might have missed during the original investigation 30 years ago. The witness statements from Lucy's disappearance contained several mentions of Judge Winters. He had been at the church picnic where Lucy was last seen, and several people remembered seeing him talking to children throughout the afternoon. At the time, this had seemed natural. Judge Winters was known for his involvement with foster children and his interest in their welfare. But now, reading the statements with 30 years of additional experience and Emma's testimony fresh in his mind, Tom saw a different pattern. Judge Winters had made a point of interacting with children who were in vulnerable situations, those from broken homes, those in temporary custody arrangements, those who lacked strong protective advocates. Tom found a photograph from the church picnic, a group shot taken by the local newspaper photographer. Lucy Martinez was visible in the background, standing near a table where Judge Winters was serving lemonade to children. The image that had once seemed innocent now appeared sinister. Maria Santos knocked on his office door, carrying a thick folder of her own research. "Sheriff, I've been digging into Judge Winters' background, and there are some things you need to know," Maria said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "What did you find?" "Financial records going back 20 years. Judge Winters has been making substantial donations to foster families, particularly those caring for children who later went missing or were returned to the system under concerning circumstances." Tom looked up from Lucy's file. "How substantial?" "Thousands of dollars per family. always described as charitable gifts to help with children's expenses, but the timing is suspicious. The donations typically occurred shortly before problems developed with the placements. This information suggested that Judge Winters had been using financial incentives to gain access to vulnerable children. The foster families might have been unwitting accomplices, grateful for the financial help and unaware of their benefactors. True motives. There's more, Maria continued. I ran a background check on Judge Winters's personal history. He never married, never had children of his own, but he's been involved with child welfare organizations for over 40 years. Tom considered the implications. Predators often positioned themselves within systems that gave them access to potential victims, while also providing them with cover through their apparent dedication to helping children. As the afternoon wore on, Tom realized he was facing the most difficult decision of his career. The evidence was pointing toward a respected community leader, someone whose word had carried enormous weight in legal proceedings for decades. Accusing Judge Winters without absolute proof would destroy Tom's credibility and potentially allow a predator to escape justice. But Emma's courage in speaking truth, combined with Lucy Martinez's 30-year-old drawings, demanded action. These children had trusted him with their secrets, their fears, and their fragile hopes for safety. Tom locked Lucy's files back in the card box, but this time he placed Emma's hospital bracelet on top of the stack. 2 children, separated by 3 decades, both deserving justice and protection. The investigation was about to enter its most dangerous phase. Tom drove to the Valley Recovery Center the next morning with Maria Santos, knowing that Rebecca Martinez held pieces of Emma's story that could either support or complicate their emerging case against Judge Winters. The desert landscape stretched endlessly on both sides of the highway, providing time for Tom to prepare his questions carefully. Rebecca looked healthier than she had during Tom's previous visit, her eyes clearer and her hands steadier. The rehabilitation program was clearly helping, but Tom could see the deep shame she carried about her failures as Emma's mother. I've been thinking about what you asked me, Rebecca said before Tom could speak. About Emma talking about a grandfather figure. I remember more now that my head's clearer. Tom leaned forward attentively. What do you remember? Emma used to come back from her visits to the courthouse for hearings about custody arrangements, and she'd be excited about seeing Judge Grandpa. She said he had a special room where children could play while their parents talked to lawyers. Maria made notes while Tom processed this information. Judge Winters had been using his position to gain access to vulnerable children right within the courthouse system, creating opportunities for grooming under the guise of making legal proceedings more child-friendly. Did Emma ever describe this special room? Tom asked. Rebecca nodded slowly. She said it had toys and games, but the games were different from regular games. Secret games that only special children got to play. She seemed confused about whether she liked these games or not. This testimony aligned perfectly with Emma's hospital statements and with the behavioral patterns documented by her foster families. Tom realized that Emma's trauma had likely begun long before her placement in foster care. Judge Winters had been abusing her during what should have been routine legal proceedings. Rebecca, this is very important, Tom said gently. Did Emma ever mention other children being in this special room? Yes. She talked about seeing pictures of children on the walls and sometimes meeting other kids who were there for visits. She said some of them looked sad, and she wondered why they didn't want to play the special games. Tom felt sick thinking about the systematic nature of Judge Winters' operation. He had created a private space within the courthouse where he could abuse children while their parents dealt with legal proceedings in other parts of the building. After leaving the rehabilitation center, Tom and Maria drove directly to the county courthouse. As sheriff, Tom had access to most areas of the building, but Judge Winters' former chambers had been locked since his retirement 5 years ago. The courthouse janitor, an elderly man named Frank, who had worked in the building for 20 years, agreed to unlock the chambers for their inspection. Judge Winters was real particular about his space. Frank explained as he fumbled with his keys. Never let anyone clean in here without him being present. Said he had sensitive legal documents that required special handling. The chambers consisted of a main office, a small conference room, and what Frank described as Judge Winter's consultation room, where he met privately with families and children involved in custody cases. Tom's blood chilled when he saw the consultation. room. The walls were covered with photographs of children, dozens of smiling faces spanning several decades. A closer examination revealed that many of the photos showed children in foster care or temporary custody situations that had come before. Judge Winter's court. "My God," Maria whispered, studying the photo wall. "He's been documenting this for years." Tom found a filing cabinet in the corner and discovered it was unlocked. Inside were manila folders containing detailed records of Judge Winter's interactions with specific children, including notes about their progress and receptiveness to special attention. Emma's file was near the front, containing photographs of her drawings and what appeared to be Judge Winter's personal observations about her psychological state. The notes were clinical and detached, describing Emma's initial resistance, followed by gradual acceptance of participation. Most disturbing was a folder labeled Special Projects that contained photographs Tom recognized as some of the missing children from the cases Maria had researched. Lucy Martinez's school photo was prominently displayed, along with detailed notes about her potential and tragic early termination of our relationship. "Tom, look at this," Maria called from the conference room. She had discovered a hidden door behind a bookshelf that opened into a small basement room accessible only through Judge Winter's chambers. The basement room was exactly as Emma had described in her drawings, a windowless space with children's furniture, toys, and games. But the toys were arranged in ways that suggested they were props rather than genuine playthings, and the games included items that no legitimate children's play area would contain. Tom documented everything with his camera while Maria searched for additional evidence. In a locked drawer, she found what appeared to be Lucy Martinez's diary, a small pink book with a broken clasp. "Tom, you need to read this," Maria said, her voice shaking. Lucy's diary entries from the weeks before her disappearance painted a horrific picture of escalating abuse disguised as special attention from a respected authority figure. The final entry, dated 3 days before her disappearance, was particularly haunting. "Judge Grandpa says I'm his most special friend, but the games are getting scary. I don't want to play anymore, but he says bad things will happen to other kids if I don't. I wish I could tell Mama, but Judge Grandpa says no one would believe me because he's important and I'm just a little girl." Tom sat heavily in one of the small chairs, overwhelmed by the weight of evidence they had uncovered. Lucy Martinez had tried to resist Judge Winter's abuse, and her resistance had likely led to her death. Emma had been luckier. Her placement in foster care had removed her from Judge Winter's immediate access, though not before significant damage had been done. "We have enough for a warrant," Maria said quietly. Tom nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead to the challenges they would face. Judge Winters was 78 years old, highly respected in the community, and had powerful friends throughout the legal system. Accusing him would require overwhelming evidence and careful handling to prevent him from destroying additional evidence or fleeing. "We need to move fast," Tom said. "Once word gets out that we're investigating Judge Winters, he'll have every incentive to disappear." They spent the rest of the afternoon securing the courthouse evidence and coordinating with the district attorney's office. Tom insisted on personally briefing DA Margaret Collins, knowing that the political implications of the case would require careful management. DA Collins was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had built her reputation on prosecuting difficult cases. When Tom presented the evidence, her reaction was immediate and decisive. "This is going to destroy confidence in our entire judicial system," she said after reviewing the photographs and diary entries. "But if Judge Winters has been abusing children, For decades, we have no choice but to pursue this aggressively. Tom appreciated her directness. What's our timeline for obtaining a search warrant? I can have it ready by tomorrow morning. But Tom, you realize that once we execute this warrant, there's no going back. If we're wrong about Judge Winters, our careers are over. If we're right, we're going to uncover crimes that will haunt this community for generations. As evening approached, Tom returned to the hospital to check on Emma. Dr. Chen reported that Emma was showing signs of psychological improvement, sleeping better, engaging more with the nursing staff, and expressing interest in activities beyond drawing. She's been asking about you, Dr. Chen said. She wants to know if the bad man is going to be stopped. Tom found Emma reading a children's book with one of the nurses. When she saw him, she smiled. The first genuine smile he'd seen from her since pulling her from the creek. Sheriff Tom, did you find the house with the red door? Emma asked. Yes, Emma. We found it, and we found evidence that will help us make sure the man who hurt you can't hurt anyone else. Emma nodded solemnly. Good. The other children in the pictures looked scared. I don't want them to be scared anymore. Tom's heart broke for this brave child who, despite her own trauma, was concerned about other victims she'd never met. Emma's empathy and courage were driving him to ensure that Judge Winters faced justice for decades of concealed crimes. As he prepared to leave the hospital, Emma called out to him. Sheriff Tom, will you keep my bracelet safe? Dr. Chen says I can go to a new family soon, but I want to remember that you helped me. Tom gently removed the small plastic hospital bracelet from Emma's wrist, promising to keep it safe. The bracelet represented not just Emma's survival, but her transformation from victim to survivor, to someone strong enough to help other children by telling her truth. Tomorrow would bring the search warrant and the beginning of Judge Winters' reckoning. But tonight, Tom held Emma's bracelet and Lucy Martinez's diary, understanding that some cases were worth waiting 30 years to solve properly. The search warrant arrived at Tom's office at 7 in the morning, along with a team of state investigators, who would assist with processing what promised to be an extensive crime scene. Tom had requested their involvement to ensure the evidence would withstand any challenges Judge Winters' defense team might mount. At exactly 8 o'clock, Tom knocked on the front door of Judge Winters' Victorian house. The red door that had featured so prominently in Emma and Lucy's drawings opened to reveal a distinguished-looking man with white hair and kind eyes, exactly the sort of grandfather figure that would naturally attract children's trust. Sheriff Harlan, Judge Winters said calmly, I was wondering when you might come calling. Please, come in. Tom was struck by Judge Winters' composure. Either he was an exceptional actor, or he genuinely believed he could manipulate his way out of the situation. Judge Winters, I have a warrant to search these premises in connection with the abuse of Emma Rodriguez and the disappearance of Lucy Martinez. Judge Winters examined the warrant carefully, his expression never changing. I see. Well, Sheriff, I suppose you'll want to begin with my study. That's where I keep my appointment calendar. Tom followed Judge Winters into a wood-paneled room lined with law books and framed photographs. The appointment calendar sat prominently on the desk, a leather-bound book that documented 30 years of meetings with foster children, court cases, and what Judge Winters euphemistically referred to as mentoring sessions. I've always believed in taking a personal interest in the welfare of children who appear before my court, Judge Winters said conversationally. So many of them lack stable adult relationships. Tom flipped through the calendar, noting entries that corresponded with Emma's courthouse visits and going back 3 decades, appointments with Lucy Martinez in the weeks before her disappearance. Judge Winters, I need to inform you that you're under arrest for child abuse and suspected murder. Judge Winters nodded, as if this were a routine legal proceeding. I understand, Sheriff, but I think you'll find that my relationship with these children was entirely appropriate. I provided guidance and comfort to young people who desperately needed positive adult attention. Tom read Judge Winters his rights, while the state investigators began their systematic search of the house. Within an hour, they had discovered additional evidence that painted a horrific picture of systematic abuse spanning decades. The basement room was exactly as Emma had described. A windowless space furnished with children's items, but arranged more like a stage set than a genuine play area. Hidden cameras were mounted in corners, suggesting that Judge Winters had been documenting his crimes for his own purposes. Most damning was a fireproof filing cabinet containing detailed records of Judge Winters' interactions with specific children. Each file included photographs, psychological assessments, and what appeared to be strategic plans for grooming particular victims based on their vulnerabilities. Emma's file was thick with documentation spanning the 2 years since she had entered the foster care system. Judge Winters had been tracking her placements, influencing her case assignments, and arranging opportunities for private access under the guise of legal consultations. But it was Lucy Martinez's file that provided the breakthrough Tom had been seeking for 30 years. The file contained not only photographs and grooming records, but a detailed account of Lucy's final days, written in Judge Winters' own handwriting. According to his notes, Lucy had begun resisting his advances and threatening to tell her grandmother about the games. Judge Winters had decided that Lucy represented an unacceptable risk to his operation, and had planned what he described as a permanent solution to ensure operational security. The final entry in Lucy's file was dated the day of her disappearance. LM proved unreceptive to continued participation. Removal accomplished without complications. Burial site secured on remote section of property. Investigation will find no useful evidence. Tom felt 30 years of guilt and frustration crystallize into cold determination. Judge Winters had not only murdered Lucy Martinez, but he had documented the crime with the detached professionalism of someone who viewed children as disposable objects rather than human beings. "Maria, get a team out to search Judge Winters' property for burial sites," Tom radioed, "and contact Lucy Martinez's family. We may finally be able to give them closure." As the search continued, Tom discovered that Judge Winters' crimes extended far beyond individual abuse. Financial records showed a complex network of payments to foster families, social workers, and even some law enforcement personnel. Bribes designed to ensure access to vulnerable children and silence about any concerns that might arise. The appointment calendar revealed meetings with dozens of children over 3 decades, many of whom had subsequently disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances. Judge Winters had used his position to identify the most vulnerable children in the system, then manipulated their placements to ensure his access to them. By afternoon, ground-penetrating radar had located what appeared to be human remains in a remote corner of Judge Winters' 15-acre property. The discovery confirmed Tom's worst fears about the scope of Judge Winters' crimes. This wasn't just abuse, it was serial murder of children who had threatened his operation. Tom confronted Judge Winters in the interview room at the sheriff's department, hoping to extract information about other victims and potential accomplices. "Judge Winters, we've found Lucy Martinez's burial site on your property. We've also found evidence that you've been abusing children for over 30 years. The only question now is whether you're going to cooperate or force us to piece together every detail of your crimes." Judge Winters remained calm, almost professorial, in his demeanor. "Sheriff, I think you misunderstand the nature of my relationship with these children. I provided them with attention and affection they weren't receiving elsewhere. Many of them were eager participants in our activities." Tom felt physically sick listening to Judge Winters' rationalization of child abuse. "Emma Rodriguez was 7 years old when you assaulted her. Lucy Martinez was 6 when you murdered her. These were children, not willing participants in your crimes." "Children are naturally affectionate," Judge Winters replied. They respond to kindness and guidance from authority figures. I simply recognized their need for special attention and provided it." Tom realized that Judge Winters showed no remorse or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. In his mind, he had been performing a service for disadvantaged children, and their resistance or trauma was simply unfortunate but necessary consequences of his methodology. As the interview continued, Tom began to understand the full scope of Judge Winters' operation. He had been systematically identifying vulnerable children through the court system, manipulating their placements through financial incentives and professional relationships, and then abusing them under the cover of legitimate mentoring and guidance activities. Children who proved unreceptive to his attention were either returned to the system with negative behavioral reports that made them unlikely candidates for permanent placement, or in cases like Lucy Martinez, permanently silenced to protect his operation. The appointment calendar served as both his planning tool and his trophy collection, documenting decades of calculated predation against the most defenseless members of their community. Tom thought of Emma's courage in speaking truth despite her terror, and Lucy's final diary entries expressing her wish to tell someone about her abuse. These children had tried to seek help through a system that Judge Winters had corrupted from within. As evening approached, Tom faced the reality that Judge Winters' arrest was only the beginning. The investigation would likely reveal additional crimes, additional victims, and possibly additional perpetrators who had enabled or participated in the network Judge Winters had created. But for the first time in 30 years, Tom felt that justice was finally within reach. The excavation of Judge Winters' property began at dawn, with forensic specialists from the State Crime Lab working methodically to recover what they hoped would be Lucy Martinez's remains. Tom stood at the edge of the search area, watching investigators carefully document each layer of soil removed from what appeared to be a carefully prepared gravesite. Dr. James Rivera, the child psychologist who had been working with Emma, arrived at the sheriff's department with crucial new evidence. Emma had agreed to participate in a recorded interview that could provide the detailed testimony needed to ensure Judge Winters' conviction. "She's remarkably resilient," Dr. Rivera explained as he set up the video equipment. "Emma understands that her testimony could help other children, and she's determined to tell her story completely." Tom watched through a one-way mirror as Emma, dressed in clothes donated by community members, sat calmly in the child-friendly interview room. Her recovery over the past week had been remarkable. The frightened, traumatized child he'd pulled from the creek had been replaced by a brave little girl who understood the importance of speaking truth. "Tell me about Judge Grandpa's house," Dr. Rivera said gently. Emma's response was detailed and specific, describing the interior layout of Judge Winters' home with accuracy that could only come from personal experience. She talked about the basement room, the hidden cameras, and the photographs of other children that covered the walls. "He said the children in the pictures were his special friends," Emma explained. "Some of them looked happy, but some looked scared. He told me that the scared ones had to go away because they didn't want to play games anymore." Tom's blood chilled as he realized Emma had been shown photographs of Judge Winters' previous victims, including Lucy Martinez. She had been forced to see the consequences of resistance while being groomed for her own abuse. "Emma, can you describe any of the other children you saw in the pictures?" Dr. Rivera asked. "There was a girl with pigtails and a yellow dress. She looked really sad. Judge Grandpa said her name was Lucy, and that she used to be his favorite friend before she decided she didn't want to visit anymore." This testimony directly connected Judge Winters to Lucy Martinez and established his pattern of using previous victims to intimidate current ones. Emma had been psychologically tortured, with evidence of Lucy's fate while being prepared for similar treatment. The forensic team's work at the burial site confirmed Tom's worst fears. The remains were consistent with those of a 6-year-old child. and personal items found with the body-match descriptions of clothing Lucy Martinez had been wearing when she disappeared. Tom drove to notify Lucy's family personally. Her parents were now in their 70s, having spent 30 years wondering what had happened to their daughter. Her mother, Rosa Martinez, collapsed in Tom's arms when he delivered the news that Lucy's body had been found. "We always hoped she might still be alive somewhere," Rosa sobbed. "Part of us never gave up believing she might come home." Tom helped the Martinez family through their grief, while also preparing them for the difficult realities of the trial process ahead. Lucy's remains would provide crucial forensic evidence, but the family would have to endure months of legal proceedings as Judge Winter's crimes were fully prosecuted. Back at the sheriff's department, Maria Santos had been analyzing the financial records discovered at Judge Winter's house. The scope of his operation was becoming clearer and more disturbing with each document she examined. "Tom, this goes deeper than we thought," Maria said, spreading bank statements and cancelled checks across the conference table. "Judge Winters has been making payments to at least 12 different people over the past 20 years. Tom studied the payment records, recognizing names of foster families, social workers, and courthouse personnel. Judge Winters had built a network of financially compromised individuals who either actively assisted his crimes or remained silent about suspicious circumstances they observed. "Look at this pattern," Maria continued, pointing to recurring payments. "Every time a child was removed from one of these foster homes due to behavioral problems, Judge Winters made a substantial payment to the family within a week." Tom realized that Judge Winters had been paying families to report behavioral issues that would make children appear troubled or unreliable as witnesses. If a child began showing signs of trauma or tried to report abuse, their foster families would document behavioral problems that discredited the child's credibility. The investigation revealed that Judge Winters' corruption had infected multiple levels of the child welfare system. Social workers had been paid to expedite certain placements, courthouse staff had been bribed to provide private access to children during legal proceedings, and even some law enforcement personnel had received payments in exchange for cursory investigations of missing persons reports. Tom's phone rang with a call that made his stomach drop. Mayor Robert Thorne's voice was tense with barely controlled anger. "Tom, I'm getting reports that you've arrested Judge Winters on charges related to child abuse. Please tell me these reports are exaggerated." "They're accurate, Mayor. We have overwhelming evidence that Judge Winters has been abusing and murdering children for over 30 years. There was a long pause before Mayor Thorne responded. "Tom, Judge Winters is one of the most respected members of our community. These accusations are going to destroy confidence in our entire legal system. Are you absolutely certain about this evidence?" Tom was struck by the mayor's focus on community reputation rather than child welfare. "Mayor, we found Lucy Martinez's body buried on Judge Winters' property, along with his written confession to her murder. The evidence is indisputable." "This is a disaster," Mayor Thorne said. "Tom, I need you to handle this investigation very carefully. Judge Winters has friends throughout the state, and if we mishandle this prosecution, it could have serious political consequences." After ending the call, Tom realized that political pressure was going to complicate an already difficult case. Judge Winters' connections and community standing would generate sympathy and doubt about his guilt, despite overwhelming evidence. Dr. Chen called with an update on Emma's psychological condition. "She's showing remarkable progress. The video testimony session seems to have been therapeutic for her. She feels like she's finally been heard and believed." "How is she handling the knowledge that her testimony will be used in court?" Tom asked. "She's frightened, but determined. Emma understands that testifying against Judge Winters might prevent other children from being hurt. She's incredibly brave for someone so young." That evening, Tom visited Emma at the hospital one final time before her discharge to a new foster family. She was packing her few belongings with help from a volunteer, and she smiled when she saw Tom. "Sheriff Tom, Dr. Rivera said my video will help put the bad man in jail." "That's right, Emma. Your courage is going to protect other children." Emma handed him a drawing she'd made that afternoon, a picture of herself standing next to Tom and Dr. Chen, with a rainbow overhead and the words "safe now" written carefully at the bottom. "This is for you to keep," Emma said, "to remember that sometimes bad things happen, but good people can make them better." Tom accepted the drawing with emotions he couldn't express. Emma's resilience and forgiveness were humbling, especially when contrasted with Judge Winter's complete lack of remorse. As he prepared to leave the hospital, Emma called out to him one more time. "Sheriff Tom, will you make sure Judge Grandpa can't hurt any more children?" Tom looked into Emma's trusting eyes and made the same promise he'd made to himself when he first saw Lucy Martinez's file 30 years ago. "Yes, Emma, I promise he'll never hurt another child." The breakthrough came at 2 in the morning when Maria Santos discovered a coded ledger hidden behind a false panel in Judge Winter's home office. The leather-bound book contained 30 years of encrypted entries that detailed financial transactions, victim profiles, and operational procedures that painted a terrifying picture of systematic child trafficking. Tom studied the ledger under the harsh fluorescent lights of the sheriff's department, using a decryption key they'd found taped inside Judge Winter's desk drawer. As the coded entries became readable, he realized they were looking at something far more extensive than individual abuse cases. "Tom, look at these financial records," Maria said, pointing to a series of large cash deposits. Judge Winters was receiving payments from outside sources, significant amounts that correspond with specific children's disappearances. The ledger revealed that Judge Winters hadn't been acting alone. He was part of a network that included buyers from other states who were willing to pay substantial sums for access to specific types of children. The operation had been carefully structured to appear legitimate through the foster care system, while actually functioning as a sophisticated trafficking organization. Most shocking of all was a section titled "Local Partners" that contained coded references to other community leaders who had been involved in the network. As Tom decoded the entries, familiar initials began to emerge: RT, Robert Thorne, MW, Margaret Williams, and several others that Tom recognized as prominent citizens. "My God," Tom whispered as the implications became clear. "Mayor Thorne has been part of this from the beginning." Maria looked over his shoulder at the decoded entries. "Look at this transaction history. Mayor Thorne received payments every time a missing child case was closed without resolution. He's been covering up these crimes for decades." Tom's mind raced through the implications. Mayor Thorne's pressure to handle Judge Winter's case quietly wasn't about protecting the community's reputation. It was about protecting his own involvement in child trafficking. His insistence on political considerations over justice made sense now that Tom understood Thorne was a co-conspirator rather than a concerned public official. The ledger contained detailed records of children who had been processed through the network over 3 decades. Lucy Martinez's entry showed she had been initially designated for local utilization by Judge Winters, but when she became resistant, she was reclassified as a disposal case. Emma's entry indicated she had been marked for external transfer, meaning she was supposed to be sold to buyers outside their county. Tom realized Emma's rescue from the creek had interrupted a planned trafficking operation. Someone had been preparing to transport her out of the area when she either escaped or was abandoned. Due to complications, the timing of her discovery suggested the transfer had been scheduled for that night. "Maria, we need to bring in federal authorities immediately. This is way beyond our jurisdiction." As Tom reached for his phone to call the FBI, it rang with an incoming call from Mayor Thorne. "Tom, I need to see you immediately. There are some complications with the Winters case that require immediate attention." Tom's pulse quickened. If Thorne was calling at 2 in the morning, he either knew about the ledger's discovery or was panicking about other evidence that might surface. What kind of complications, Mayor? The kind that require face-to-face discussion. Meet me at my office in 20 minutes. Tom looked at Maria, understanding that this confrontation could be extremely dangerous. If Mayor Thorne was willing to meet in the middle of the night, he was either preparing to confess or planning to eliminate the investigation's key witnesses. "I'm going to wear a wire," Tom told Maria. "If Thorne is part of this network, we need his confession on record." Maria helped Tom set up the recording equipment while they waited for backup units to position themselves around City Hall. Tom had worked with Mayor Thorne for 15 years, had considered him a friend and ally, but the ledger's revelations cast every interaction in a different light. Mayor Thorne was waiting in his office when Tom arrived, looking haggard and desperate in a way Tom had never seen before. The confident political figure had been replaced by someone who understood his carefully constructed world was collapsing. "Tom, sit down. We need to discuss how to handle the Judge Winters situation." "What's there to discuss, Robert?" "Judge Winters is a child abuser and murderer. The evidence is overwhelming." Mayor Thorne poured himself a drink from a bottle he kept in his desk, his hands visibly shaking. "Tom, you don't understand the complexity of this situation. Judge Winters wasn't operating alone." "I'm beginning to understand that," Tom replied carefully. "There are powerful people involved in this network, people who won't hesitate to eliminate threats to their operation. Your investigation is putting both of us in danger." Tom realized Mayor Thorne was trying to position himself as another victim of the trafficking network rather than acknowledging his role as a co-conspirator. "Robert, I found Judge Winters' ledger. I know about your involvement." Mayor Thorne's composure cracked completely. "You don't understand, Tom. I never wanted to hurt children. I was just providing political cover, making sure investigations didn't go too far. I thought Judge Winters was just a pervert who liked kids. I didn't know about the murders until it was too late to back out." Tom's recording device captured every word of Mayor Thorne's confession. "How long have you been covering up missing children cases?" 20 years. Maybe more. Judge Winters said it was just about protecting troubled kids from publicity, keeping their cases out of the media. He paid me to make sure investigations were handled quietly, without a lot of outside attention. "What about the buyers, Robert? The people paying for access to these children?" Mayor Thorne looked genuinely confused. "What buyers? Tom, I thought this was about Judge Winters molesting kids, not selling them." Tom realized that Mayor Thorne had been a useful idiot rather than a full partner in the trafficking operation. Judge Winters had manipulated him into providing cover while keeping him ignorant of the network's true scope. "Robert, children were being sold to people in other states. Judge Winters was running a trafficking operation, not just abusing kids locally." Mayor Thorne collapsed into his chair, the full horror of his complicity finally becoming clear. "Oh God, Tom, what have I done? How many children died because I helped cover up their disappearances?" Tom felt a mixture of disgust and pity for the mayor who had traded children's lives for political convenience and financial gain. "We need the names of everyone else involved, social workers, foster families, anyone who took money from Judge Winters." "I have records," Mayor Thorne said quietly. "Bank statements, payment schedules, correspondence. I kept everything as insurance in case Judge Winters ever tried to blackmail me." Over the next hour, Mayor Thorne provided details about the network's local operations, while Tom's recording device captured his full confession. The scope of corruption was breathtaking. Dozens of community leaders had accepted payments to facilitate child trafficking, most of them believing they were simply helping Judge Winters provide extra attention to needy children. As dawn approached, Tom had enough evidence to dismantle the entire network. Mayor Thorne's records would lead to arrests throughout the county, and the federal authorities would be able to trace connections to trafficking operations in other states. "Tom, what's going to happen to me?" Mayor Thorne asked as FBI agents arrived to take him into custody. That depends on how much you cooperate with the federal investigation. You enabled the deaths of children for 20 years, Robert. Justice is going to be complicated. As Mayor Thorne was led away in handcuffs, Tom realized Emma's rescue had been even more fortunate than he'd initially understood. She had been scheduled for transfer to buyers outside the county, and her discovery in the creek had likely prevented her from disappearing forever into a network of predators. The investigation was about to expand far beyond their small community, but Tom knew that Emma's courage and Lucy's long-delayed justice had finally begun to unravel a conspiracy that had operated in plain sight for 3 decades. Winter's secret ledger lay open on Tom's desk, its coded entries now revealing the systematic destruction of innocent lives. But it also represented evidence that would finally hold the entire network accountable for their crimes against the most vulnerable members of society. The FBI task force arrived in Tom's small community like a precision military operation, bringing resources and expertise that transformed the sheriff's department into a major crime investigation center. Special Agent Rebecca Walsh, a veteran of child trafficking cases, took charge of coordinating the multi-state investigation that Judge Winter's ledger had revealed. Tom found himself working 18-hour days, coordinating local evidence with federal investigators while managing the community crisis that the arrests had created. The revelation that Mayor Thorne and Judge Winters had been part of a child trafficking network sent shockwaves through the town, creating divisions between those who couldn't believe such crimes were possible and those who were demanding answers about decades of missing children. "Sheriff, we've identified buyers in 7 different states," Agent Walsh reported during their morning briefing. Judge Winter's network was providing children to customers as far away as California and Florida. Tom studied the map, displaying connections between their small county and trafficking operations across the country. Each colored pin represented a child who'd been sold into abuse, torture, or worse. The scope was overwhelming, but it also meant that Emma's rescue had potentially saved dozens of other children from similar fates. Dr. James Rivera arrived at the sheriff's department with Emma's final psychological evaluation. Despite everything she had endured, Emma was showing remarkable resilience and was ready to testify in federal court if necessary. "She's an extraordinary child," Dr. Rivera explained. "Emma understands that her testimony could help convict not just Judge Winters, but the entire network. She's determined to ensure that other children don't experience what she went through." Tom felt immense pride in Emma's courage, but also the weight of responsibility for protecting her during what would be an extremely difficult trial process. The defense would likely attack her credibility and try to minimize her trauma. Standard tactics in cases involving child witnesses. "How is she handling the knowledge that there were other children involved?" Tom asked. "She's shown remarkable empathy." Emma has been drawing pictures of children she remembers from Judge Winter's photographs, hoping to help investigators identify additional victims. Tom's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Maria Santos. Judge Winters had requested a private meeting with his attorney, and surveillance indicated he might be preparing to provide information about the broader network in exchange for a reduced sentence. At the county jail, Judge Winters sat across from Tom and Agent Walsh with the calm demeanor of someone negotiating a business transaction. His attorney, a high-powered criminal defense lawyer from the state capital, had flown in to manage what was clearly going to be a complex plea arrangement. "My client is prepared to provide detailed information about the trafficking network in exchange for life imprisonment rather than the death penalty," the attorney announced. Tom studied Judge Winter's face, looking for any sign of remorse or acknowledgement of the suffering he had caused. Instead, he saw only calculated self-interest and the cold pragmatism of someone trying to minimize personal consequences. "What information?" Agent Walsh asked. "Names, locations, Financial records, operational procedures, Judge Winters replied. I maintained detailed documentation of the entire network for 30 years. I can provide evidence that will lead to arrests in multiple states. Tom felt conflicted about making any deal with Judge Winters, but he also understood that the information could save children who were currently being trafficked through the network. Emma's case had been just one thread in a web that extended far beyond their community. Judge Winters, before we discuss any arrangements, I want you to understand something, Tom said, leaning forward. Emma Rodriguez is 7 years old. Lucy Martinez was 6 when you murdered her. These were children who trusted you, who looked up to you as a grandfather figure. Judge Winters showed no emotional response. Sheriff, I understand your anger, but we need to focus on practical solutions. My cooperation can dismantle an operation that has been harming children for decades. Tom realized that Judge Winters would never acknowledge the human cost of his crimes. He viewed children as commodities, and his own prosecution as simply a business setback requiring strategic management. Agent Walsh spent the next hour negotiating the terms of Judge Winters' cooperation. The federal authorities were primarily interested in the larger network, and Judge Winters' detailed records could provide the evidence needed to rescue children who were currently being held by other members of the trafficking operation. Meanwhile, Maria Santos was coordinating arrests throughout the county based on Mayor Thorne's records and Judge Winters' ledger. Social workers, foster families, and courthouse personnel who had accepted payments were being taken into custody, each arrest revealing additional connections to the trafficking network. Tom's phone rang with a call from Dr. Chen at the hospital. Sheriff, Emma wanted me to call you. She's been having nightmares again, but not about her own trauma. She's dreaming about the other children in Judge Winters' photographs, and she's worried about whether they're safe. Tom felt his heart break. For this remarkable child, who despite her own suffering was concerned about victims she'd never met. Emma's empathy was driving her to help with the investigation, even when it meant confronting her own traumatic memories. Tell Emma that her information is helping us find and rescue other children. Her courage is making a real difference. That afternoon, Tom received a visit from his daughter Sarah, who had driven from 2 states away after hearing news reports about the case. She found Tom in his office, surrounded by evidence boxes and federal investigators, looking exhausted but determined. "Dad, are you okay?" Sarah asked, embracing him tightly. Tom realized he hadn't spoken to his daughter since the investigation began. "I'm tired, sweetheart, but we're finally getting justice for children who have been hurt for decades." Sarah studied her father's face, seeing the toll the case had taken on him. "Dad, you look like you haven't slept in a week." "Some cases are worth losing sleep over," Tom replied, thinking of Emma's drawing that he kept in his desk drawer, and Lucy. Martinez's diary that had waited 30 years to be read. Agent Walsh interrupted their reunion with urgent news. "Sheriff, we've located a facility in Nevada where children from Judge Winters' network are being held. We're coordinating a rescue operation for tomorrow morning." Tom felt a surge of hope mixed with dread. Rescuing trafficked children would vindicate Emma's courage and Lucy's memory, but it would also reveal the full extent of suffering that the network had caused over 3 decades. "How many children?" Tom asked. "At least 12, ranging in age from 5 to 14. They've been conditioned to believe they have no families and nowhere to go if they try to escape." Tom thought about Emma's resilience and wondered how these children would cope with the psychological trauma of their rescue. They would need years of therapy and support to rebuild their sense of safety and trust in adults. As evening approached, Tom retrieved his father's sheriff badge from his desk. Drawer. The worn silver star had been passed down through 3 generations of law enforcement officers, and Tom had carried it throughout his career as a reminder of the responsibility that came with protecting the innocent. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation with the trafficking network that had operated in his community for 30 years. Emma's rescue from Willow Creek had started a chain of events that would finally bring justice to dozens of victims and prevent countless future crimes. Tom pinned his father's badge inside his jacket, understanding that some cases defined an officer's entire career. This investigation had already cost him sleep, strained his relationships, and challenged his faith in the institutions he had served for 3 decades. But it had also given him the opportunity to keep promises he had made to frightened children. Promises that no one else would be hurt, that justice would eventually come, that their courage in speaking truth would matter. Dr. Chen called with a final update on Emma's condition. She's been placed with a wonderful family, experienced foster parents who specialize in helping traumatized children. Emma wanted me to give you something. When Tom arrived at the hospital, Emma was waiting with a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a drawing she had made that afternoon, a picture of Tom wearing his father's badge, surrounded by children who were safe and smiling. "This is for you to keep," Emma said. "Dr. Rivera said that tomorrow you're going to help save more children like me." Tom knelt down to Emma's level, looking into eyes that held wisdom no 7-year-old should possess, but also hope that proved children's capacity for healing. "Emma, your bravery started all of this. Every child we rescue tomorrow will be saved because you were strong enough to tell the truth about what happened to you." Emma hugged Tom tightly. "Promise me you'll tell them it gets better, that there are good people who will keep them safe." Tom made that promise while holding Emma's final drawing, understanding that tomorrow's operation would either vindicate 30 years of waiting for justice or reveal failures that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But tonight, he held the trust of a remarkable child who had survived hell and emerged determined to protect other children from similar suffering. Emma's courage had already changed everything, and tomorrow it would change even more. The coordinated raids began at dawn across 7 states simultaneously, with Tom joining the FBI task force at the Nevada facility, where 12 children were being held. The compound appeared to be a legitimate youth ranch from the outside, complete with horses and recreational facilities, but the hidden basement levels revealed the true horror of the trafficking operation. Tom wore a concealed recording device as he accompanied federal agents through the facility, documenting evidence that would ensure the entire network faced maximum prosecution. The ranch's operator, a woman named Sandra Phillips, had been receiving children from Judge Winter's network for over 15 years. "These are troubled kids from broken homes," Phillips insisted, as agents placed her under arrest. "We provide them with structure and discipline they don't get elsewhere." Tom studied the discipline facilities Phillips had created, windowless rooms with locks on the outside, surveillance cameras in every corner, and restraint devices that had clearly been used on children. The contrast between the pleasant exterior and the prison-like interior perfectly captured the deception that had protected the network for decades. Agent Walsh led Tom to the basement level where the children were being held. The sight that greeted them would haunt Tom for the rest of his life. 12 young faces staring with the hollow expressions of children who had learned that adults brought only pain and betrayal. "It's okay," Tom said gently, removing his father's badge from his jacket and holding it where they could see it. "We're police officers, and we're here to take you somewhere safe." The children ranged in age from 5 to 14, representing different stages of the trafficking process. The younger ones showed signs of recent trauma, while the older children displayed the mechanical compliance of those who had been conditioned to obedience through prolonged abuse. A 10-year-old girl named Katie was the first to speak. "Are you really going to help us, or is this another game?" Tom's heart broke for these children who had been manipulated and betrayed so often that they couldn't distinguish between rescue and additional abuse. He thought of Emma's courage in trusting him despite her trauma, and he understood that these children would need time to believe that safety was genuine. "This isn't a game," Tom said firmly. "My name is Sheriff Tom Harlan, and I promise you that no one will ever hurt you again." Katie studied Tom's face with the intensity of a child who had learned to read adult intentions for survival. "There was a girl here who talked about a sheriff who pulled her out of water. She said he was nice." Tom felt his pulse quicken. "What was her name?" "Amy. She said a man with white hair brought her here, but she escaped and hid by a creek until someone found her." Tom realized that Katie was describing another child who had been trafficked through Judge Winter's network, someone who had managed to escape before Emma's rescue. The timing suggested that multiple children had been processed through the system, simultaneously with Emma's discovery representing only one strand of a much larger operation. "Where is Amy now?" Tom asked. Katie's expression grew sad. "They took her away when she kept trying to run. The lady said Amy needed special discipline at a different place." Agent Walsh immediately began coordinating with other task force units to locate facilities where children who resisted the trafficking process were sent. Tom understood that Amy's fate could reveal additional levels of the network's brutality toward children who refused to comply. As medical personnel began evaluating the rescued children, Tom's recording device captured Phillips providing information about the network's operations. Unlike Judge Winters, Phillips showed genuine fear about the consequences of exposure. "You don't understand," Phillips said desperately. "These people don't just run a business. They eliminate anyone who threatens them. If I cooperate with you, they'll kill me." Tom studied Phillips' terrified expression, realizing that the network included enforcement mechanisms designed to prevent defection or cooperation with law enforcement. Emma's rescue had likely triggered security protocols that put everyone connected to the operation at risk. "Who are these people?" Agent Walsh demanded. Phillips provided names and locations of network leaders in other states, revealing a hierarchy that extended far beyond Judge Winter's local operation. The trafficking ring was part of a national network with connections to organized crime figures who viewed children as renewable commodities. As the rescued children were transported to medical facilities for evaluation and treatment, Tom called Dr. Chen to update her on the operation's success. 12 children rescued, Tom reported. "They're going to need extensive psychological care, but they're alive and safe now." "How are you holding up, Sheriff?" Dr. Chen asked. "This has been an enormous emotional burden for you." Tom looked at his father's badge, now bearing the fingerprints of frightened children who had touched it while deciding whether to trust him. "I'm thinking about promises I've made. To Emma, to Lucy Martinez's family, to these children I just met. Some promises are worth whatever it takes to keep them." The recording device had captured hours of evidence that would dismantle the trafficking network permanently, but Tom understood that the emotional cost of this victory would stay with him forever. Tonight, 12 children would sleep safely for the first time in years, and Emma's courage had made that possible. The arrests across 7 states created a domino effect that dismantled the trafficking network within 72 hours. Tom returned to his small community to find FBI agents coordinating with local authorities to process evidence from dozens of raids that had yielded over 40 rescued children and hundreds of suspects. Agent Walsh briefed Tom on the operation's unprecedented success. Judge Winters's cooperation led us to network leaders we'd been tracking for years. This is the largest child trafficking bust in FBI history. Tom felt a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion as he surveyed the evidence that filled his sheriff's department. 30 years of wondering about Lucy Martinez's fate had finally led to justice, not just for her, but for dozens of other victims whose cases had been connected through Judge Winter's meticulous record-keeping. The federal prosecutors were preparing cases that would ensure Judge Winters and his co-conspirators received maximum sentences. Judge Winter's plea agreement had provided the evidence needed to trace money flows, identify buyers, and locate facilities across multiple states. "What about Amy, the girl Katie mentioned?" Tom asked. Agent Walsh's expression grew serious. "We found her at a facility in Arizona. She's alive, but she's been through additional trauma since her escape attempt. The network had protocols for dealing with children who tried to resist or flee." Tom felt sick thinking about the additional suffering Amy had endured because of her courage in trying to escape. Like Emma, she had shown remarkable bravery, but the network's enforcement mechanisms had made her pay dearly for that courage. Maria Santos arrived with final arrest reports from their county. 23 people taken into custody, including social workers, foster families, and courthouse personnel. The corruption went deeper than we imagined. Tom reviewed the list of arrests, recognizing names of people he'd worked with for years. The betrayal of trust was staggering. Individuals who were supposed to protect children had instead facilitated their abuse and trafficking. Dr. James Rivera called with updates on the psychological evaluations of the rescued children. "They're going to need years of therapy, but there's reason for hope. Children are remarkably resilient when they receive proper care and support." That afternoon, Tom attended Lucy Martinez's memorial service, which had been delayed while her remains underwent forensic examination. The church was packed with community members who remembered the bright 6-year-old girl and wanted to honor her memory after 30 years of uncertainty. Rosa Martinez approached Tom after the service, tears in her eyes, but also gratitude. "Sheriff, thank you for never giving up on Lucy. She can finally rest in peace." Tom accepted her thanks while thinking about the promise he'd made to himself 30 years ago, that Lucy's case would someday be solved. Emma's rescue had been the key that unlocked decades of concealed crimes. Judge Patricia Williams, who had overseen the foster care system during many of the trafficking cases, submitted her resignation amid revelations that her administrative decisions had unknowingly facilitated the network's operations. The entire child welfare system would require rebuilding with new protocols and oversight. Tom found himself alone in his office that evening, surrounded by evidence boxes and case files that documented one of the most complex criminal investigations in his county's history. Emma's hospital bracelet sat on his desk next to Lucy's memorial stone, two symbols of justice finally achieved. His phone rang with a call from Emma's new foster parents, reporting that she was adapting well to her placement and showing continued signs of psychological healing. "She asks about you every day," Emma's foster mother said. "She wants to know if the bad people are all in jail now." Tom smiled for the first time in weeks. "Tell Emma that the bad people are in jail and they won't ever hurt children again. And tell her that Sheriff Tom is very proud of how brave she was." The federal investigation would continue for months as prosecutors prepared cases against network members across the country. Tom's role would shift from active investigation to testimony and evidence coordination, but the most dangerous phase of the operation was complete. Agent Walsh stopped by to brief Tom on the network's complete dismantlement. "Your county was the hub of a trafficking operation that victimized over 200 children across 3 decades. Emma's rescue broke the entire system open." Tom thought about Emma's courage in speaking truth despite her terror, and Lucy's 30-year-old diary, entries that had provided crucial corroborating evidence. 2 children, separated by decades, had finally brought justice to a network that had operated in plain sight. As Tom prepared to leave his office, he noticed Emma's final drawing propped against his computer monitor, the picture of him wearing his father's badge, surrounded by safe and smiling children. The drawing had become prophetic, representing not just hope, but actual achievement. Tomorrow would begin the long process of healing for the community and for the rescued children. The trafficking network was destroyed, its leaders facing life imprisonment, and its victims finally safe. Tom picked up his father's badge, understanding that some cases justified an entire career in law enforcement. Emma's rescue from Willow Creek had led to the salvation of dozens of other children and the resolution of mysteries that had haunted families for decades. Justice had finally arrived, 30 years late, but complete at last. 6 months after Emma's rescue from Willow Creek, Tom stood at the edge of the water where he had first found her floating face down on that terrible morning. The creek looked different now, peaceful rather than ominous, flowing clean and clear through the ranch land that had witnessed both tragedy and redemption. Emma ran toward him across the meadow, her laughter carrying on the spring breeze like music. At 8 years old, she had grown taller and stronger, but more importantly, she had learned to smile without reservation and play without fear. Her new adoptive family, the Hendersons, had provided the stability and love she needed to heal from her trauma. "Sheriff Tom!" Emma called out, carrying a basket of wildflowers she had picked. "Look what I found for Lucy." Tom watched as Emma carefully arranged the flowers near a small memorial marker that had been placed at the creek's edge. The simple stone bore Lucy Martinez's name and dates, along with the inscription, "Beloved daughter, finally at peace." "Lucy would have liked these flowers," Emma said seriously. "They're the same colors she was wearing in the picture at Judge Grandpa's house." Tom marveled at Emma's ability to transform traumatic memories into acts of remembrance and healing. She had not forgotten her experiences, but she had learned to process them in ways that honored other victims rather than simply dwelling on her own suffering. Dr. Sarah Chen approached from the path leading to the parking area, carrying a folder of medical reports and psychological evaluations. Emma's recovery had become a case study in childhood resilience and the importance of early intervention in trauma cases. "How is she doing?" Tom asked quietly. "Remarkably well. Emma has processed her trauma in healthy ways and developed strong attachments to her adoptive family. She still has nightmares occasionally, but they're becoming less frequent." Tom nodded, remembering the frightened child he had pulled from this creek 6 months ago. Emma's transformation from victim to survivor to thriving child represented everything that made his career in law enforcement meaningful. Maria Santos, who had been promoted to sheriff after Tom's retirement, arrived with updates on the ongoing prosecutions of network members. 47 individuals had been convicted across 7 states, with sentences ranging from 20 years to life imprisonment. Judge Winters himself had received life without parole, despite his cooperation with federal authorities. "The foster care system has been completely restructured," Maria reported. "New oversight protocols, mandatory background checks every 6 months, and psychological evaluations for all children in care. Emma's case changed everything." Tom felt satisfied that institutional changes would protect future children from the systemic failures that had enabled Judge Winters' network. Emma's courage in speaking truth had not only rescued dozens of trafficked children, but had also prevented countless future crimes. Dr. James Rivera joined their group, bringing news about the other children who had been rescued during the federal raids. 38 of the 42 children have been successfully placed in specialized care facilities or with trained foster families. They're all showing signs of psychological recovery. Tom thought about Katie, the 10-year-old girl who had asked whether his rescue promises were real. She was now living with a family in Colorado, attending school regularly and learning to trust adults again. Amy, the girl who had escaped before Emma and suffered additional abuse, was recovering in a specialized treatment facility, but showing remarkable progress. Emma tugged on Tom's sleeve, drawing his attention to something she wanted to show him. From her pocket, she produced a carefully folded piece of paper. Another drawing, this one showing the creek surrounded by flowers and filled with clear, clean water. "This is how I see the creek now," Emma explained. "Not scary anymore, just a place where good things can happen." Tom accepted the drawing with emotions he couldn't fully express. Emma's ability to reclaim the place of her trauma and transform it into something positive represented the ultimate victory over the evil that had threatened to destroy her. As the afternoon sun began to slant through the cottonwood trees, Tom reflected on the case that had defined the final years of his career. Emma's rescue had been both an ending and a beginning, the conclusion of 30 years of wondering about Lucy Martinez's fate, and the start of a new chapter focused on healing and prevention rather than investigation and prosecution. Judge Patricia Williams, who had also retired after the scandal, approached with a group of reformed child welfare administrators. The new system they had designed included multiple safeguards against the kind of institutional corruption that had enabled Judge Winter's network. "Sheriff Harlan," Judge Williams said formally, "we wanted to thank you for your persistence in pursuing this case despite significant obstacles and institutional resistance." Tom nodded acknowledgement while thinking about all the people who had truly made justice possible. Emma's courage in speaking truth, Lucy's diary that had waited 30 years to be read, Maria's methodical investigation, and Dr. Chen's compassionate medical care. As the group began to disperse, Emma ran back to Tom with one final request. "Sheriff Tom, will you promise me something?" "What's that, sweetheart?" "Promise me that if you ever find another child who's scared and hurt, you'll tell them that it gets better, that there are good people who will keep them safe." Tom knelt down to Emma's level, looking into eyes that held wisdom earned through suffering, but also hope that proved the human spirit's capacity for healing. "I promise, Emma, and I promise that your courage in telling the truth will always be remembered by every child we help." Emma hugged Tom tightly, then ran back to her adoptive family, her laughter echoing across the creek where her nightmare had ended and her new life had begun. Tom stood at the water's edge as the sun set behind the mountains, holding Emma's new drawing and Lucy Martinez's memorial stone. The creek flowed peacefully toward the distant horizon, carrying with it the memory of tragedy transformed into justice and fear conquered by courage. Some cases, Tom understood now, were worth waiting 30 years to solve properly. Emma's rescue had not only saved her life, but had given meaning to every difficult decision he'd made during his career in law enforcement. The creek sang softly in the gathering dusk, no longer a place of horror, but a monument to the triumph of truth over secrecy and love over evil.